Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. Busy week at the Capitol. So busy we're going to have an opinion maker panel for the full show, starting with Sara Baker of the ACLU here in Missouri. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
LaKeysha Bosley, legendary St. Louis family, finally came on the show. We're very glad to have you.
Well, thank you. I am glad to be here.
I like the pen. What does it mean?
Dream every day. You can't stop people from dreaming. When you stop dreaming, then you stop believing and you stop trying to create change. So dream every day.
Love it. Legislator, Representative Becky Ruth from Jefferson County. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And I'm going to say Stephen Danger McCullough with the Barclays Company. Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start right off the top. What a week in state government. There were so many. I think this is the week right before the spring break. You know, when you come back, you'll start hearing Senate bills, the Senate or House bills. You really start perfecting bills. This is kind of one of the last couple of weeks where it's like Wild West. And in that came a proposal out of nowhere, kind of from the budget chair, about an issue that you've been on top of from really the time you got elected, which is infrastructure. First of all, tell me what you've been doing on infrastructure, and give me, if you had the pencil just to write in what the state's infrastructure plan should be, what would it be?
Well, I've been working really hard on infrastructure, as you said, from day one. We see our roads and bridges really in a state of dire repair. We hear about it, you know, the people voted down Prop D. That was something that everybody was disappointed in, but I always say we have to move past that now. We tried that, it failed, so now what? And the now what, the governor's come up with what I think is a pretty solid plan. I've supported the governor's plan. I actually sponsored the bill in the House.
And the governor's plan is to do some bonding for these bridges. He's went and took pictures of these bridges. You've had some people, you've had some people in the suburban areas argue that, well, we don't have bad enough bridges. We want more money for our bridges if you're going to do bridges. But the point system kind of rates the bridge. If the bridge is about to fall down, that's kind of how they've come up with the list. I don't think they generated the list politically, right?
Right, they did not. They went through and they looked at some of the worst bridges. You know, one of the things we have to think about, we have so many commuters, trucks, everything else going over those bridges, and school buses. So it's a real safety concern. We want to make sure that our roads and our bridges are in good shape. The governor came up with a bonding proposal, so $351 million. And by the way, we do bonding for all kinds of things in our state. I believe the Truman Building was actually built with bonding. So we do have some bonds outstanding right now, but the governor came up with what I thought was a solid plan to be able to do that bonding, be able to repair those 250 bridges in our state, free up those off of the STIPs, because we have to remember those bridges were already there on the STIP, scheduled for repair, but now we would be able to do them much sooner. So then that frees up that other $351 million that was already accounted for in the STIP. So now we're talking $702 million, and on top of that is the infra grant that we've applied for, which also hinges on doing that bonding. So that's $200 million. So now we're talking about being able to do $902 million worth of road and bridge projects for that one bonding bill.
Come ahead, Chairman. Stephen, I mean, look, I get it. You probably get more Facebook likes if you say guns everywhere or whatever. This is actually the adult part of governing that people have came to. It may not be the sexiest thing. It may not get a standing ovation Lincoln Day. But even if you're a conservative, the government should have schools and roads, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, again, I am upset about Prop D failing. The schools and roads and bridges and everything else needs that money. And the idea that we don't have a way to fund it is really kind of scary. But
my thought is you're a guy that doesn't support a lot of tax increases, but I heard you support this one.
Correct.
Look, I think this is there's a handful of issues that are just good government issues. That I get it. It may not be the sexiest thing to talk about. It may not inspire hatred and love. But even Republicans and Democrats say you got to build roads, right? And even if a person's in O'Fallon, if you want to drive to Memphis for the weekend, as much as they may hate it, they got to drive through Perry County on a bridge.
And I agree. However, I think that when we subject ourselves to years out of revenue that we're not eligible or knowledgeable of getting back, that sets us up for failure. We have so many bonds out. We have a deficit right now that we're hoping that the taxpayers can pay for with DOR's mistake that they've now retracted and said that it wasn't a 15-year mistake. So
well, Crystal Blake gets smarter every day, doesn't she?
So with that, we just have to look at what we're doing fiscally and be fiscally responsible. And I don't think that having a credit card, so to speak, that we're not going to be able to pay off that credit for.
So you're going to vote against bonding for bridges?
I'm not going to vote against bonding for bridges. I just think that we need to have a solid plan and think of how we're going to actually make that revenue up.
That's an interesting thing. I mean, when you talk about public policies, I bet the ACLU itself doesn't have an official position on whether the state should go in to do some bonding, but many times over, Republican administrations and Democratic administrations have went and said, look, there's a problem, we can actually save money. It's like your car, right? If it may cost you some money. You may have to put your oil change on your credit card, but it's better than buying a new engine, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always balance to be had. And no, the ACLU doesn't have a specific position on roads and bridges, but I'll tell you from my own commute and the potholes that I face, you know, I hope that we do come to some sort of consensus about what we can do to make it safer for everyone to travel in Missouri.
Like close that bridge coming in from Callaway County into the Capitol. That might change a lot of folks' view of the situation, right?
Yeah, oh goodness, would it?
So you're also very in-depth and knowledgeable about the state budget. The budget chairman came out and said we have $100 million. Let's just use that to fix the bridges. I think some folks might ask, well, where does the $100 million come from? Where, if you dig deeper than the headline, where he's proposing that comes out of some funds that were transferred?
I understand that this is from some carryover funds from last year, about $117 million carryover funds. So, you know, I think we have a lot of time between March and May. Lots of negotiations are going to happen between the House, the Senate, the governor's office. I think everybody is committed to finding the right solution. And I believe that we will reach a solution. What that looks like at the end, we're just not sure of right now. But there's room for negotiation. And the most important fact is that infrastructure, transportation is taking a front row right now. You know, the focus is there. I'm happy to see that. I'm happy that the budget chair is making that a priority and to focus on that critical infrastructure need.
So what do you think? I mean, to me, it does sound a little bit, it surprises people there's this money there. When it goes forward, I assume if you can put that in the budget, it's something you could support, but sustainability, that might not be the most sustainable way to do this, right?
Right. We have to look at also our long-term funding solutions for our transportation. As the governor had always said, even with the bonding proposal, this is a Band-Aid. It's a kickstart to get us kind of going and where we need to do. We can do a lot of projects with this. But we do have to look long-term, and we have to consider this. We've talked about gas tax. One of the things that we need to consider with the gas tax is that those revenues are going to continue to decline. As we see the technology push forward in terms of electric cars, fuel-efficient cars, things like that, that's one of the reasons why we're seeing some decline already.
Always the great hypocrisy when you see someone say, well, the voters voted on this, it's settled. And that may be true because they oppose a gas tax increase, but on right to work, no, that's not settled. Clearly, we have to file that again. I think that's always in the eye of the beholder to whether the voters have spoken and the issue settled. Let's talk about something that I think is frankly a new issue that we, on this show, and I think really a new issue being discussed in state politics is Title IX. I think that while I agree with you, I think there were people that wanted to have this bill pass. There's been a discussion that's been started that I think's been eye-opening on many fronts that I wouldn't have even anticipated. But break down the Title IX changes that are being proposed right now in the legislature.
Right. So I think a lot of folks think that Title IX is just about access to sports for women, and that's not at all the scope of Title IX. Title IX was signed into law in 1972, and it basically covers access cannot be denied on the basis of sex. And so that can mean a lot of things. It can talk about sports, but it can also mean freedom from sexual harassment on campus.
I thought Title IX was mostly about equality in athletics.
Yeah, I mean, it covers a wider scope. And so the discussion being had in the legislature right now is about how do we make sure that due process rights for all are preserved in Title IX proceedings without making it so victims won't come forward. Because we know 40% of women do not report sexual assault when it comes to campus. We know that 1 in 4 women are sexually assaulted during their lifetime. And so we have to make sure that women will come forward. And the concerns we have with the bill are that they weight the rights heavily in favor of the accused. And while there might be some procedural moves to do there to make sure that due process rights are respected, we think some of those are already in place, and the bills that are being proposed could really damage the relationship with victims coming forward as well.
Representative, I've come to know you as a pretty rational person, a logic-based person. When this was explained to me, I don't think there was any sinister thing. I read something where I was like, oh no, Joe Lakin is wrapped up in a dark money thing, and it was Joe Larkin. I was like, well, if it's Joe Larkin, then that's not right. But anyway, I do think that there's people that do feel, and frankly, I believe that the motivation for this came from some people in the African-American community feel like if you're an African-American young man, you do not have due process rights to confront your accuser, and you can be kicked out of school or academically disenfranchised on something where you don't get to come forward. It seemed to me there was room in the law for some change.
Well, there's always room for change. You know, that's why we are legislatures, because if you think about it, or legislators, because if you think about it, if everything was in place right now, we would still be living in the 1800s, and we're not progressing and moving forward. So in that Title IX, it does have that effect also on African American men who have been accused for years and decades and time out for sexual harassment or sexual assault, and come to find out that it never happened.
I think you're fooling yourself if you say young African American men aren't disenfranchised inside the criminal justice system. I don't think you're a serious person if you can't accept that reality. I think in Title IX, I think the argument was it's the same and maybe worse.
It is the same, and it is another systematic structure that disenfranchises African American men and put them in a box where they can't necessarily get out. So that is something that we do need to look at, and possibly changing it and amending it so that it is fair for all people, especially African Americans.
So this is a measure I'm sure you've looked at. I think that it's been interesting to me, the evolution of women in the Republican House caucus over the last, really during your time there. I think it's coincided with the years you've been there. I do think in that caucus, people do look for a woman to speak before the discussion's closed. It looked to me like this was a place where you could make some adjustments to the law, maybe not radically change it, but that's probably the right way. The conservative way is to go slow.
I agree with that. I think we have to look at due process. Anytime we're looking at issues, we want to make sure there's due process for everyone. I think there's some concern that right now there's really not enough due process, and I think that's why those changes were brought up.
So here's what's been amazing. We talked about this on the show last week. You see something that fundamentally just changes your worldview. The number of women that I had come up to me, women that I didn't know well, some of them I do well, one I personally care about, told me some stories about college. Most all happened from college, and about times they were sexually assaulted, even raped. I believe there are people who have no idea. Maybe Title IX gets addressed this session, maybe it doesn't. The issue of some of the things that happen on college campuses, where I can just tell you personally, it really changed my view of the world, the stories that were coming up and told to me unsolicited from the discussion on the show.
Yeah.
And what do you do to, maybe that's the bigger issue, is how do you address these problems, not how you adjudicate them, how do you keep them from happening on college campuses?
Right, and I think that's where our colleges, our universities have to come into play here, and they have to start having these serious talks as to how do we make sure that we're keeping our students safe, that we're getting knowledge and information out there. But then there is that line too, as we just talked about, to make sure that we also have due process in place so you don't have someone that is wrongly accused. You know, in our court system, you are eligible to see, you know, the accusers, your evidence against you, and when this stuff is happening on college campuses, we're seeing that's not really happening. So I think we have to protect those people that this happens to, in terms of those that have been victims of this, but also those people that have been falsely accused.
Do you think guys that look like you and I probably don't see the world like a woman would that's went through college and looks at this issue? That's one thing I've learned, is it just is very hard to see the world from somebody else's perspective.
I agree with you completely on that. It's, you know, women have it really hard out there. I think it's more of a social issue, though. I'm not sure if we can legislate people into morality. You know, families and fathers need to focus on raising their young men to respect women. And until that happens, I think we're going to keep having this conversation.
That's probably right.
Well, I personally think, going back to the representative's comment in terms of systematically what we're seeing is if you allow the accused to know specific things about the accuser is not going to come forward. So usually in trials, you only get that when somebody is being convicted or if there is a trial. So if there's just steps in the process, I don't think the accused should be able to have that information if it comes back that somebody says, well, we didn't find enough evidence for this for us to go forward with anything. You're limiting us from not, you're limiting the women from being able to want to come forward because they're gonna feel like everybody has my information. Now I get harassed on campus because I have said this and now nothing is being done about it.
I have a sense this is not the last time we're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
But we do have to take a break. We'll be right back. We're going to keep the Opinion Maker panel around as long as they'll stay.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
Looking to get quality insurance at a price you can afford? Now you can, thanks to CFM Insurance. Select from our broad range of farm, home, and rental property coverage. Find an agent right in your local area, as CFM is represented by a network of 200 independent agencies throughout Missouri. For personal and dependable service from a company with a history of insuring the families of Missouri that dates back to 1869, visit WeInsureMissouri.com and find an agent near you today.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
At Ameren, Missouri, we know what light can do. It draws people together and chases monsters away. And if you shine it in the right direction, it will light the path for the next generation, showing them what their tomorrow could look like and spotlighting the possibilities that lay in front of them. Investing in our community by lighting the way forward. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back to this week in Missouri Politics. Let's talk about the big issue carried over from last week. Stephen, the speaker come out with an abortion bill carried by Nick Shore. They had Schwarrenton and Mary Elizabeth Coleman was a part of it. And they put forward basically every issue that I think Missouri Right to Life would want to address. They give a very aggressive approach, probably the most pro-life speaker in the country now.
Right. First, before my opinion, I think we should all applaud Mike Moon on that. He's been working on this for years, and I don't think he's getting any credit now that we're making traction. I understand abortion is a really personal and emotional issue to a lot of people, and there's probably people here who disagree with me, and I respect that and I understand it, but I just have to say that it is always a moral evil to execute an innocent life, and anything or any legislation we can pass to protect the innocent unborn is very worthwhile. I'm very excited about.
Representative Ruth, I think when you look at it from a public policy perspective, it looks as though they kind of took the entire abortion landscape and looked to address it all in one, I guess you'd call it an omnibus abortion bill. I
think so, but I think at the heartbeat of it all, if I might say, is making sure that we are protecting those innocent lives. We have seen some, what I would call pretty radical laws being passed in other states in terms of, abortion seconds before baby is born, or if there's a, the discussion out there, if there's a botched abortion and the baby's born alive, not providing medical care, not, allowing that life to continue. And, that's just, to me, that's outright infanticide, and that's not protecting human life.
On the floor, there are a lot of Democrats were very passionate in their opposition of it. Yes. It seemed like they took the entire abortion debate and really moved it in a pro-life direction pretty rapidly. And I do read reports in the media about how it's terrible. Most all these people ran as pro-life legislators. So what do you expect them to do?
I understand their position. However, it's my body as a woman. I get to have a say-so on what goes on with me. You don't feed me, you don't clothe me, you don't bathe me. For you to have the audacity to tell me that I can't control my life. What if you know that I can afford this child? We run into that where a lot of kids are put in the system. Right now in foster care, we're trying to pay for kids to live there. And parents can't take care of them. We're 30% unemployment, but they don't tell you that those are minimum wage jobs and people are working 2 and 3 and 4 of them. But for you to tell me as a woman that I can't have control, it's it's pretty disheartening of us going backwards in the sense of giving women the rights and giving them their power and then telling them, well, you have to be a human incubator at this point if you don't want this child.
I would assume where most of these bills go is they end up being litigated in the courts. I think that the people that put this bill together tried to look to that and tried to write some things, some stopgaps, if parts of these were found unconstitutional. I assume there's a large element of this to be litigated.
I definitely think that's something to be considered. However, I want to echo Representative Bosley's point. I think this is fundamentally about a woman's right to do what she chooses with her own body. And I think we're a state right now that's kind of being hypocritical. We're saying we don't want government interference in a myriad of different ways, but we're putting it directly involved in a woman's most personal decision. And I think this fundamentally comes down to autonomy. So yes, there may be maneuvers in the court, but I certainly hope that Missourians recognize that this is the most extreme abortion bill in the country, and try to mitigate and pull back from that, and recognition that we value women's health as well.
I do think, though, until the Missourians start electing legislators who are pro-choice, that's probably where the debate's going to continue to shift.
In that people will still be having, I understand that the debate in Missouri might for generations continue to be relatively similar, but the fact is that we cannot legislate every woman's life, every personal story that happens in our state, and we shouldn't make laws that try to craft the family of any Missourian.
Let's talk about college funding. I think a lot of these things, when you talk about abortion, or many of these issues come from folks that don't have access to higher education. The state come down and they really, I guess Missouri State was the big winner this week. I saw Cliff Smart work in the halls, and I wondered why, and then I read the story and I realized why. They were a big winner in some of this, some of the allotment they put out to take care of the campuses. I ran into you, and Harris Stowe maybe didn't get their due, and you were not happy.
I am not happy, and I won't be happy until we get it. But when you think about it, Harris Stowe is the only HBCU in the St. Louis region, in the St. Louis area. You have Lincoln, which is our second HBCU, and historically they've never been fully funded. Harris Stowe is a smaller institution, yes, but they're growing. And as Missourians, we say, show me your growth, and they've shown growth over and over and over again, and yet they're still getting slapped in the face and saying, well, because you're paying more for students or you're paying more per pupil, then you really don't need the funding. And it is atrocious as a state for us not to support growth. They had to turn away 250 applicants because they couldn't house them. They only have 33 full-time employees, and that's not even teachers. So when we're thinking about actually funding our universities,
what you're saying?
If we think about funding our institutions, we need to look at funding growth. And Harris Stowe is that growth, and they deserve to have that funding.
So you're on the budget committee. Every time there's a budget cut, higher ed gets the axe first, right? There's a point where there's no more what's the old Republican three-step waste, fraud, and abuse. Like with MoDOT, the waste, fraud, and abuse line. I mean, honestly, I don't think that's seriously a policy discussion. In higher ed, there's been a lot of cuts.
There have been. I actually don't sit on the budget, but you know, I try to keep abreast of what's going on, and I'm a retired educator myself, so. I couldn't tell you the budget chair's feelings on those. I mean, he has to look at the overall budget and decide where the money goes and how we spend it. You know, the legislature has input on that, the House, the Senate, and oftentimes when a budget comes out of the House and when it goes to the Senate and what finally comes out of it looks very different. Yeah.
Stephen, do you think maybe the lesson here is when you have the choice to vote and you're in a rural community, you can vote for maybe the most extreme person that might not be a good legislator, or you can vote for a good legislator, and it looks like, look at the geography of where that money's going. People that elected the strongest legislators that are in leadership did well.
I think a lot of times people go to the ballot box and they're thinking emotionally and not logically. And
well, the good people in the Joplin area, it looks like they thought pretty intelligently, and I think they're seeing a benefit for that, right? Elections matter.
No, I agree. Elections matter. They have consequences.
Let's talk about this city-county merger. It seems to come up all the time. Here's the part I think is missing. So you see people that did a bunch of studies, come up and said they should merge the whole county into one essentially city. There'll still be some cities, but essentially you'll see the decision-making come from one larger head. It'll be a statewide vote. There's probably the way you have to do it, basically. At some point, you have to statewide vote anyway. The one thing I'm not hearing from people is what's their proposal? Do they think the current system's working? How do you see the situation now?
Yeah, I mean, I see the situation as developing, which is what I think we all are watching happen. I think the things that we're going to keep a watch for are making sure that voters are well represented and that there's fairness in how things are drawn, that there's accountability no matter what happens, particularly police accountability. So those are the things we'll watch for in any merger that might happen. But as far as the developments going day to day, I think we're still seeing people in a learning phase, to be honest, about what they want for the future of this region. And I think there's also a lot of concern amongst voters in St. Louis City and St. Louis County about decisions being made for them by the state as a whole, rather than them being allowed to make the decision for themselves.
So I've seen you be very vocal on social media.
Yes.
I know you're against what's being proposed now.
Yes.
What would, do you think the current system works? What would you say the move would be? If not this, is it status quo, or do you have an idea from the other side?
Well, there's already something in the Constitution. You have Title you have Title 6, Section 30A, where it gives you the Board of Freeholders. It tells you that the mayor appoints 9, the county executive appoints 9, the governor appoints 1, and they come up with a plan presented to them by the people. The people have to have input, and I think what we're more so focused on with the city-county merger proposed by the Better Together team is that there was really no input from the people who live there. I didn't see it.
You're opposed to that.
I'm opposed to the process.
Would you support the city coming back into the county?
I would support whatever the people of St. Louis City and St. Louis County would want. I am not opposed to having St. Louis City sit within St. Louis County, such as Kansas City sits within Jackson County. But what I'm opposed to is a forced consolidation, a forced merger without having the input of the people who live there. You had 2,500 people that you had town halls with in a region of 1.3 million. Come on, when you have the real input of someone, then you have their input.
Sitting across the Merrimack, what do you think?
Well, Jefferson County, while a lot of people say it doesn't impact us, but it will impact us, depending upon what happens. You could see an influx of a lot of people moving south to Jefferson County, and then we have to look at, housing, economy, sustaining that.
Look at your Steiner knowledge. You think that's what, if it passes, what happens?
I think you have some people possibly moving out because we have some people that are very set against this, don't want it, and say, if it happens, we're probably not going to continue to be St. Louis County.
I see nothing wrong with growth in Jeffco. But with a minute left, who won the week?
Oh, I'm going to go with Representative Gina Mitten for her piercing questions about Title IX.
Yeah.
Won the week?
I'm going to go with House Democrats because even though we're in a super minority, we're keep fighting. So
you don't want Gina Mitten all against you. That ain't the place to be.
She's amazing.
Besides the Crystal Tavern, if this merger comes through in Crystal City, who won the week?
Chuck Basie won the week. He won the week for getting his bill to make sure kids with disabilities get the insurance coverage they need for their therapies.
Serious piece of legislation. Congratulations. Who won the week?
I think my mom won the week because she wins every week for me. And this week is actually my birthday. And
happy birthday.
Thank you. Every year I appreciate more and more that she chose life. So very happy about that.
I'm going to say Senator Jamil Nasheed ran a very close election for President of the Board of Aldermen, showed back up at the Capitol the next day and put in a 14, 15, 16-hour day. I think that takes a lot of fortitude. I think Jamil Nasheed won the week. I hope you'll win the week next week by joining us on This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics, sponsored by the Missouri Association of Career Fire Protection Districts, Spire, and Sterling Bank.